hall, and we'll be filling it with all kinds of instruments, bringing them down here. Probably take up half this room, I would guess, pretty close to it. The amazing thing about it is not only does he have this wonderful collection, but he's an expert player on all those instruments. So it's going to be a fabulous afternoon. I highly recommend it. That's next week. The week after that, which would be February 6th, yes. Captain Robert Peacock of Eastport, who is one of the pilots responsible for bringing big ships into Passamaquoddy Bay here. One of the ships that, some of the ships that he brings in are the Navy ships that visit us here in Eastport on the 4th of July every year, and have done so for decades. And he's going to be talking about that. Not only does he bring the ships in, but he's very instrumental in organizing the whole thing. And he's going to tell us what's involved in that, which is quite a lot, and there are quite a lot of stories. And as I say, this is over a 50-year period. He's only been doing it for about 35 years, I think. So, after that is the 13th of February. Jane Lanko, very wonderful keyboard player who lives in Lubec now, is going to be bringing her forte piano. For those of you that don't know, forte piano designates a piano from the very early days of the piano, middle of the 18th century, and it looks like a piano and works pretty much like a piano, but has quite a different sound. And she has an instrument modeled on an 18th century forte piano. She's going to be bringing that and be playing it, talking about it. She's a wonderful player. This is late 18th century music. She's going to be playing a Mozart Sonata. Interestingly enough, there's a Mozart letter which talks about a particular kind of forte piano, and that's the kind of forte piano that she's going to be talking about. So it's kind of neat. And after that would be the 20th of February. Roland LaValle, well-known Eastport artist and wood carver, is going to be talking about what he does. And I think that he's been here before and done that, and was so popular that we've got to have him do it again. I won't bore you with what's going on after that. Margaret there has a list of them every Sunday between now and May, except for Easter. I recommend our programs, of course. I'm a little bit biased. Today, we're very fortunate to have Mark Macey, our very own Mark Macey, I should say, who's been around Eastport for more than 2 years now. He was an Island Fellow. The Island Institute of Rockland, Maine has a wonderful program. It sends their fellows on islands all over Maine, and they consider Eastport an island, which after all it used to be. And we're very fortunate. We've had Island Fellows for a number of years now. And Mark was here for 2 years. It's a 2-year program. And at the end of that 2 years, which was last summer, we decided we didn't want to let him go. And fortunately for us, he didn't seem to want to go either. So we hired him on, and he is now the Art Center's Creative Development Coordinator. And he does many things for us in that position, including making all kinds of videos, many of which are available to you on YouTube. And he's also the director of our children's theater program, together with our wonderful intern sitting right there, Elle. And but Mark also wears another hat here. He is the artistic director of Stage East, one of our constituent groups. And I hope many of you saw the production he recently directed, Almost Maine, which we did last month. Mark is from Utah, Salt Lake City, graduate, has a BA from the University of Utah in theater, then went on to the Del Arte Institute in California, also studying theater. One of the founders of a theater group called Sucker Punch, which some of you may have, theater buffs in the audience here, may have encountered. I could go on about Mark's theater chops, but I think I'm going to let him do that. Please welcome Mark Macey.
Thanks, Greg. I should bring you to my interviews and those sorts of things. Can everybody hear me all right? I think this will be okay. Okay, cool. So like Greg said, I'm Mark, and I know most of you out there in the audience, so that's cool. And I'm here today as the artistic director of Stage East, and I'm excited to talk about this big word, dramaturgy, and kind of demystify it. So I've given this little presentation discussion a title, which is Page to Stage, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Dramaturgy. So that's so dramaturgy, kind of a big academic word and very vague. It is used in a lot of different ways, but for our purposes, it really just means the study of theater. And I think more specifically, it talks about how the theater makes meaning. So that's a sentence that probably hits your ear a little weird, so I'll say it again. How the theater makes meaning. So hopefully it'll be clear what I mean by that as we go. There are sort of three main sections of this presentation. The first is a very brief and selected overview of theater history. And then we'll talk about how to read scripts and how to read plays and how those two things are different. Then we'll talk very, very briefly about trends in the 21st century to kind of give you some context. And then finally we'll do kind of a questions and comments, a little bit of a discussion. So that's what it'll look like. And I've tried to spice it up a little bit as to not lull anyone to sleep. I am aware it's Sunday afternoon, so I'll be taking a nap after this one. So this is just what we'll be looking through. We're gonna cover Greece. We're gonna cover the Italian Renaissance. We're gonna cover Elizabethan theater, kind of mid 20th century theater, and then a phenomenon kind of late 1990s, early 2000s. So we'll start off in Greece. I should also say this very selected and brief history is skewed very much to European and Western theater. So there's stuff going on all over the world as we kind of progress through the ages, but we're just focusing in on this to give us context for where we are now, being in the American theater. So anyway, in Greece, the theater was very tied to religion and the state. And these dramas developed out of religious rites, and they were performed at festivals for the Greek god of theater, and among theater and other things, wine and the orchards and vegetables and fruits and that kind of thing. But wine in particular and theater, and if you know theater people, that sort of makes some sense, I think. But the really important thing I want to talk about in Greek theater is the Greek chorus, which this is sort of a picture of. They wear masks, they sing or chant together, they move together, and they represented the common people. So often these plays that were written were about noble themes, noble characters who were encountering big ideas and big challenges. And they would be broken up by the chorus coming in and commenting on that action. So these were the common people coming in, commenting on this action. So hopefully you'll see a theme as we go out, and part of the reason we go through the history part is there are sort of these two sections that are always kind of bumping up against each other. These noble, high-minded kind of ideals and thoughts and philosophies, and then on the other end, common kind of base everyday things. So just to keep that in mind. We're gonna jump over a lot of stuff. Roman theater, which is a lot of copycatting Greek theater, and also medieval theater, which was more or less missionary work. What would happen is the church would send out people to go do plays that were based on the Bible, essentially, for people who couldn't read, right? So there's some interesting stuff going on, but it really is mostly about telling people how great the church is. So near the end of the medieval ages, you get court players. So these are people who are retained by the monarchy, kings and queens who perform for them. these usually weren't full-length dramas or comedies. They were usually short kind of entertainments. But that changes during the Italian Renaissance. And there are two things going on. The first thing is the art part, and the second thing is the fart part, pardon the blue word. But so the first thing, if you look at this center image, it's a little small, kind of hard to see, but this is the expansion of the court dramas. So in the Italian Renaissance, they got interested again in Roman theater, and they did a lot of copycatting, as is very common in the theater and in the arts in general, of Roman theater. So they took Roman plays and they rewrote them in Italian, or they just staged Roman plays in Latin, whatever it might be. And there is some original work near the end. But the major contribution of the court dramas in the Italian Renaissance are theater architecture and theater design. So this center picture is the Teatro Olimpico, pardon my pronunciation, and you can see there's sort of this box around the stage. That's considered sort of the first proscenium arch, or one of the first. And this looks like just a set in the back, but that's actually part of the architecture. And this arch in the center there was a development where they would use single point perspective to create depth. So the sets would be built as such that they were really only 15 or 30 feet deep, but it looked like they were hundreds and hundreds of feet deep. Of course, that really worked best from one seat in the house. And you can imagine who was sitting there, the king. But a lot of other developments, there are other theaters that are built, and wings are traded mechanically, flats are traded mechanically, and there's a lot of development in theater machinery. At the same time, there's a popular street theater being developed called Commedia dell'arte. And this uses stock characters, stock situations, masks, bright and flamboyant costumes, and gestures. And it's a popular entertainment. They rove around, there are troops. These two characters here are a part of that. I won't delve into who they are and what they're all about. The main thing is that these plays in this form of theater are all about baser instincts, money, hunger, lust, and that's what powers these plots. And they're very physical, very comedic. They're often revolve around lovers who are trying to get together. This may sound familiar. Lovers who are trying to get together, and that plot is somewhat complicated by masters and their servants. And often the masters are stupid or wimpy or greedy, even though they pretend not to be. And the servants are, even though they're driven by things like hunger or lust, tend to be smarter and outwit their masters. So again, this theme of holding these things of kind of these high, noble, beautiful architecture, advances in theater technology, and based on these Roman epics, and then an art form that was really a lot about, like, you know, hitting people and pee jokes. So those two things. So we'll move to Elizabethan theater in England, and we're talking about Shakespeare when we refer to that bald guy with the earring. If you've ever seen a portrait of Shakespeare, you'll see he's losing a little hair, which I can relate to, and he's got an earring. And this photo's a little bit grainy. We'll talk about that in a second, but it's not really fair to call Shakespeare an Elizabethan playwright because he actually started writing near the end of her reign. But what's important or interesting about Shakespeare, or one of the things that's important and interesting about Shakespeare, is he sort of holds these two worlds that we've been talking about. This noble world where big ideas and big circumstances and wars and peace and the state and God and that kind of thing. And then really base common everyday things and rude jokes and common people, or scary pagan stuff like fairies and the woods and that sort of thing exist side by side. So often what you'll see in a Shakespeare play is a main plot about something noble and high-minded, or some noble and high-minded person, a king, a queen, facing some serious problem, or sometimes an unserious problem. And then beneath that, a subplot following something a little, somebody who's more common or who isn't noble. And these worlds kind of intertwine. So the point being that where these things were either sometimes separate or just sort of like in Greek theater being interjected, these two worlds come together. And that's partly because Shakespeare was a great writer, but it's more about the social changes happening in the society. And the Globe is actually a really good example of that. The Globe is a theater in which some of Shakespeare plays were performed. It's a round theater, and it has kind of a pit in the middle of it, and on one end, you can see the stage there on one end of the pit. And there were very cheap seats for people who couldn't afford anything better. They would come and they would be what were called groundlings. And they would hang out in the pit, kind of lean on the stage, that sort of thing, eat and drink. And so they were watching the play. But then also you see there are kind of tiers of seating around the theater. And that's where people who had a little more money and status would sit. So this commingling of social classes in the theater is something that's pretty new during this time. And interestingly, you would think if you were somebody wealthy, you would want, if this is the stage, you'd want to sit like right here or whatever. But actually, people would prefer to sit right behind the stage, even though it's the worst seat, because going to the theater, if you were wealthy at that time, was not about really seeing the play. That was fun too, but it was about being seen. So you would want to sit there or there. But beyond that as well, not only were these kind of class mingling here, but there was also, these were the plays that the court was seeing. Of course, the court wasn't coming to the theater to see them. The theater was coming to the court to perform them. And actually, these weren't considered performances. It was technically illegal to perform in public at this time. And so they would call them rehearsals and charge people money. And that pretty much worked, because the Queen was okay with it. So the point being, these worlds being combined, and even though Shakespeare was very much a product of his time and beholden to the state and to religion at that time, there's some complicating factors in his work where he sort of challenges those things. So that's an exciting development. Okay, stick with me. We're almost through this theater history portion. We're going to jump all the way to the middle of the 20th century. And we're going to talk about the theater of the absurd, which has a lot to do with a philosophical movement called existentialism. And the sort of main problem of existentialism is if there isn't a God or something like God, or if life has no inherent meaning, what does that mean for us and how do we navigate that? So the theater of the absurd isn't synonymous with existentialism, but they're closely linked. And I just want to point out one playwright in particular, Samuel Beckett, and this is a shot from a production of his most famous work called Waiting for Godot. You're at a theater talk, so you've probably heard of that. But what's interesting, I think, about Beckett's work and about this time in general is where taking Shakespeare, our kind of last mention, where these worlds are sort of intertwining, the high and low, this sort of almost condenses them down to one thing. There's the human world and this other, whatever, nobler world kind of become one thing. So just trying to track that a little bit. This idea of these things that might have been seen as kind of opposite kind of get a little loose and the boundaries between them start to fray. Okay, last part of our theater history. This takes us to late 1990s, early 2000s. And this is about devised theater. Devised theater is unlike written theater. Usually what you would think of in theater is the playwright writes a script. They go to get it produced, and somebody directs it and they put it up. In devised theater, those roles are really blurred. What happens is that people, a group of artists are up on their feet, maybe sometimes writing a little bit, and they're improvising and then editing from there. So they put something up on their feet, they stop, they talk about it, they revise, and they keep going. And just like there are a lot of different styles of writing, there's a lot of different ways that you can devise and different processes. But the main thing here is this, and we'll talk about this when we talk about trends, is the hierarchies and the roles of the theater start to kind of get a little loose and wiggly. And people who, actors in particular, who have been interpretive artists, they're interpreting the words of the playwright, they're interpreting the directions of the director, now become generative artists, and they're building something as they go. Okay, so I know that was a lot, so just let that wash over you, and don't worry about it. Now we're going to talk about the reading of scripts and the reading of plays, and how those are two separate things. But first I want to talk about this that most of you probably know, even if you don't know, you know it. And it's a way of describing, let's see, I want to say it was playwright in the late 1700s, but I could have my dates wrong, who came up with this model, last name of Freytag, so that's why it's called Freytag's pyramid. So exposition being the start of it. Exposition, background knowledge. So for example, I was in my house eating breakfast, okay? And then you have an inciting incident. So this is sort of the trigger which makes the rest of the action happen. So I was eating breakfast, I was in my house eating breakfast when I smelled smoke, okay? Then you have rising action. This is the complication of the story. So things kind of accrue in a way that makes the story more complex, okay? So I smelled smoke, so I went upstairs and I saw that my bedroom was on fire. So I went downstairs and I got the fire extinguisher and I came up with it, but it wasn't full of whatever's supposed to be in a fire extinguisher. It was full of gasoline. And so now my whole upstairs is on fire and I'm running outside to call 911. Okay, so complicating the story. Then the climax. A good way to think about the climax is that this is the point where the world that we were in before and the world we're about to be in, you can't go back. So let me say that a little bit better. This is the point where you can't go back to the world that we were in, where I was eating breakfast sitting in my house. So here everything is coming. I called 911 and they tell me they can't get there for another 30 minutes, okay, something like that. So my house burns down. So now I can't get back to eating breakfast in my house. Falling action is coming to terms with the climax of the story. So maybe I'm picking through the embers, or I'm, calling my mom and crying, or who knows what. And then resolution, or denouement is the word that's sometimes used, which I think in French just means outcome. And that's the new world. So if you think about before, where I was eating cereal, that's the old world. The new world is my house is burned down, and maybe I've made it to a neighbor's house and I'm sitting there having accepted my fate. Another way to think about this is that we have stasis in the beginning, and then we have an imbalance, and then we have stasis again. So we know that we're kind of in the resolution when we're firm again. And this gets really, really complicated right around right around the 20th century. Things get weird with this. We'll talk about that. Okay, so now finally to the script thing. If you talk about a play, sometimes people will say this right here. That's not quite. I've read it, but I haven't seen it. Not I read it. Oh, well, that works too. I read it, but I haven't seen it. So there's this sense of a script and a play being substantially linked. And I want to complicate that a little bit and just say that actually they're not so close. It'd sort of be like a food critic looking at a menu and writing their review off of the menu. Or you buy a house and you show up and the blueprint's there where you thought the house was. So just to divorce those things a little bit. First tip here is we tend to go to psychoanalysis pretty quick. Why did this character do this? There must be some motivation or some reason, or we even diagnose them with mental health conditions, right? Oh, well, she must have been depressed, that's why she did that, or this or that. But we want to just kind of pause on that, and these are some tips from an article that is included in my suggested reading at the end, but it just gives us some clues as to how to kind of stop ourselves from jumping to these conclusions. And it's to understand that part of what the theater does is build its own worlds. So we often make assumptions about what's happening on stage, or in a script, I should say, in this case, based on what our experience in our lives. But actually that misunderstands what a play does just a little bit. What a play does is creates a separate world, even if it's set in our world, in our time, in our place, whatever. It's showing us something in kind of a condensed way. So just like we wouldn't, take a picture to be the real event or the real thing or person or place, it's the same thing with the play. So the first thing we want to do is describe the physical world of the play. Are we inside or outside? Is it hot or is it cold? What year is it? What time of day is it? Is it raining fire outside for some reason? Are objects and people suddenly 10 times bigger than they are regularly? Whatever it might be. Then you want to talk about the social world of the play. Are there classes or hierarchies? What's polite? What's impolite? Are there things that are taboo? Are there things that are sacred? What kind of social niceties are there? Those kinds of things. What changes in the play? Do we start outside and head inside? Do we start alive and all end up dead, like in Hamlet? What in the play changes across time? So one fun way to think about this is, what's the opening image of the play? What's the first thing we see? What's the middle image of the play? Maybe at like an act break or intermission. And what's the last image we see in the play? And that can be kind of a good snapshot to see what's changed throughout this. Also, what's important, these things don't happen in a vacuum. So what's happened to me over the course of this? Did I feel uncomfortable and weird at the beginning, and now I feel relaxed and good? Did I feel relaxed and good at the beginning, and now I want to run from the room screaming? Those sorts of things. Here's another weird academic word, intertextual, which just means, does this thing that I'm reading relate to anything else? Does it call to a story from the Bible or an old song from the late 1800s? So what does it reference, and how do those connections in context create meaning as well? And then finally, you can start thinking about why these characters are behaving they do, why these characters behave the way that they do. Always remembering that they are existing in the world of the play. So this is just to sort of jump around this urge that we have to talk about this surface level psychoanalytical thing and dive into what's being proposed in the world of the play. Okay. How am I doing on time? Does anybody have the time?
35.
Okay, so good, perfect. Just 5 or 10 more minutes here. So the woman who wrote the article that I was referring to is named Eleanor Fuchs. So those steps still apply in a stage play. So the stage play is the thing that we're actually seeing. So when we think about a play, it's not this thing on paper, it's the thing out in space in real time. But those things that we just talked about still apply. What's the world of the play? What's the physical world? What's the social world? What changes? How do I change? And what is the context? We still want to do all those. And the other thing to consider is that the language of the theater is not just what's being said. It's actually everything that we're seeing. And I've already forgotten how to pronounce this. Sweetheart, will you help me out? Mise en scène. And this is, I think in French it means like to put into the scene or something like that. And it's talking about all the elements that happen on stage. So in big categories, that's the environment. That's things like set design, lighting design, sound, costuming, smell, maybe, depending on your budget. Composition. So this is, how is the stage arranged, both the set and the actors? What is the balance like, right, on stage? Where's the weight on stage? Is there tension? What is the movement like? What kind of stage pictures or tableau am I seeing? So we're describing the composition. And then also the acting. Is there a specific style this is hearkening to? For example, are they wearing masks and playing stock characters? Or are we watching a kabuki performance or something like that? The rhythm, so how, is this something that's clipping along? Is it something that's kind of stuttered and broken? The effort, are they really leaning into this? Or are they kind of away from what's happening and feeling removed? And then the affect, what is the approach to this? Is it sarcastic? Is it sincere? Is it over the top and cheesy? So all these things to consider. And then finally, again, the play itself is also happening in context to where it's being performed, who's performing it, and it doesn't end when you leave the theater. It continues to exist as this thing, a topic of discussion. Did you see this? What did you think of it? Etc. So it kind of has a life past that. And I know I'm blowing through a lot of this. I just want to. This is really the big takeaway. So this is the gold stuff, and it's stuff that I didn't come up with, but it's from a professor of mine, and it really helped me start to think about theater in a different way and enjoy theater, because that's actually what today is all about, learning how to enjoy theater in a really deep and meaningful way. So a guy's name was Tim Slover, so that's why this slide is entitled, Thanks, Tim. One is prepare for the play. So a good example of this is if you're going to go see a Shakespeare play, maybe you want to read the script before. Maybe you want to understand what's being said. Do a little bit of homework. It doesn't have to be crazy and over the top, but you just want to orient yourself. Or if you're seeing a new play, maybe you want to read about the playwright. Or if you're seeing a play that has some version or something up on YouTube, maybe you click around and see what other people are doing, and you come to it with a little bit of a perspective. Bringing your full attention, it's easy in a play to start thinking about things like what you're going to be having for dinner, or that bill you have to pay, etc. So if you can leave those things at the door, that's good. This is the hardest and most important one, suspending your judgment. It is easy, very, very easy to decide within seconds whether or not you like what is happening on stage. The issue, however, though, is whether you decide good or bad, and usually bad is the way, if you're me, the way you'll go. And then what you're doing for the rest of the performance, instead of seeing what's really happening, is building a case about why you are right, that this thing is bad, okay? So you want to suspend your judgment and observe first. What are the choices that are being made? What is actually happening on stage? Removing myself from this for a moment, what is really happening up there? Writing it down can be good. You don't want to be in the back of the theater scribbling like this, but at an intermission or once the play's out, just taking time to, doesn't have to be a novel, but some things that struck you. And that will, a play lives in your memory. It happens and then it's gone. You can't go back and see the DVD. You can go see it again, of course, if it's still running, but it's this writing down that will help you keep it vivid. And then remembering that the choices that are made, or the how, is going to reveal what? The content. So the form of the play reveals what it's about. So those choices, the lighting, the acting, the set, all of that coming together, that reveals what the play is about, not just the words that are being said. As we're literary, we're psychoanalytical, and we tend to attach ourselves to that stuff. So it's just about zooming out and remembering that is the language of the theater. That's what's being talked about. And then remember that it is about the choices that were made. And we're going to be really nice, and we're going to understand, we're going to assume that everything was on purpose. So we're going to say, we're not going to say, wow, that actor really, stunk. Okay, we're going to say, that actor played this part really, really big and large and exaggerated. Why? Okay, so that was a choice. We're also going to understand that art has a breadth of goals. So it's not always to make you feel good about your life or to entertain you. Sometimes it is supposed to make you feel bad and complicate your life, okay? So just taking that into account. And then finally you can say, was this effective? Did these choices work? And after you've done that, then you can say, yes, it was bad, or yes, it was good. And we hope it was good. But just the reason to implement this isn't because it's morally right or the correct way to watch theater. It's because even if you go to see something that you ultimately find was something that you thought was ineffective and you didn't enjoy, this process will make the good and the enjoyable stand out for you in your theater experience. And so you're gaining from that. Okay, so this is the last thing, and then we get to have a discussion. I just want to talk very briefly about sort of where we're situated now in the theater, and it will, I think, help to as you venture out and go see theater. I think it will help contextualize some of it. There's a lot on here. I'm gonna be very, I'm gonna paint with a broad brush. What's happening is that devised theater thing we talked about, and this kind of fluid thing happening with roles is continuing to pick up steam. And so the way that theater is made will always have what we think of as traditional theater, even though that has only been around for, you know, a few hundred years. But what's happening now are more multidisciplinary, so we're not just having, theater has always had a lot of components, so there's always been music in theater and lighting and scenery and that sort of thing, but now we're entering a performance space where these things aren't just supporting what's happening on stage and in a theater context, but where everything is sort of being given equal weight. So a theater performance you go to now might look like a performance art piece that you went to in a burned out building in Brooklyn in the 1990s or whatever. So there's just this loosening up of what theater is and what it isn't. Technology has become a big part, not only the use of technology and the updating, but as a mediating part of viewing something. So things like cameras being included, not only as recording the performance, but as a part of the performance, and those sorts of things. And the big kind of takeaway is this sort of melting away of traditional roles. People are expected to do a lot more in terms of generating ideas, and a lot of that has to do with, again, the social situations. And I was going to go point by point on this, but I think due to the time, I'll take questions about it if people are interested, but I'd rather have more time for a discussion. So that's kind of an anticlimactic wrap up, but that's it. But that's good because that's what theater is like now. So if anybody has questions or comments, they're all welcome. And yeah, I'll just take hands, I guess. Okay, I'm seeing 2 immediately. Oh, 3 immediately. I'm bad at choosing, so let's go here and then in that row. Okay, go ahead.
My question is for you to state with a brief definition, now that you've gone through all of this about dramaturgy, what is dramaturgy? So dramaturgy, on one hand, is a role in theater. So there's that side of it, which is a role, like a production role, the dramaturg.
This was something that that came about mid 1700s. There was a resident drama critic in a German theater whose job was to write criticisms of the plays for this theater, but they were paying him, so he was on staff. So, but he didn't spare them, you know. So and it blossomed from there. So dramaturgs, as a role in the theater, do a lot of different things. They do research for the plays, historical research. They create things like informational packets for actors and directors that contextualize that research about not just the historical perspective of whatever the play is, but things about the author, things about the play itself, picking out locations or characters that might have some reference to a real location, these sorts of things, the context of the play. But also checking in with the director throughout the production, seeing what's happening and saying, this is the message that you are presenting on stage. This is how it's reading to me and how it will probably read to your audience. Is that what you're meaning to do? And then usually the director says, please go away. So that's sort of not as often used. But in terms of dramaturgy, as what is it to do dramaturgy? For me, the briefest, and there are a lot of fun brief definitions out there, but for me it's about how to read the language we were just talking about. The mise en scène, thank you. The mise en scène, how to read that. So it's about how that language works. Yeah. Cool. And we're just going to cut into that row. So.
I'm very intrigued by rethinking the canon. Tell me more about that.
Yes, this is, looking back, this is way too long of a list for me to cover, but rethinking the canon. This is about looking now at the history and the playwrights that we've included. They're all momentous and they're all great and they all did a good job. And they are also produced by a colonial mindset, a white supremacist mindset, a classist mindset. So the idea is, we know these things were influencing decisions throughout history, so now can we go back, and it's not that we're throwing these people away, they were important and they matter, but now we're picking out people who had been ignored, who were doing this work without the recognition, and who now we can highlight and say, this was, it wasn't just these people doing this thing. Because if you look, if you cast your eye back on theater history, it's a lot of people who look like me. You know what I mean? Pretty much exclusively. But that wasn't the only thing going on. So this is an effort to say, where else can we pull from?
Cool. Thank you, Mark.
And I think we're going to go here, and then we'll go over. No, okay.
I just had a curiosity question. Earlier in the presentation, I believe you used the word intertextual, and I was just, is that like if a part of the play, like they actually include a song or a poem or something that's going on in the popular?
Yeah,
talk more about that.
Okay, yeah. So it's about. So it could be anything. It could be a literal. They literally reference something, like, let's say, Sally, you always remind me of that Rothko painting. It's like, that's a clear reference to this other thing. What is it, and what's being communicated there? The other part of it, though, is, for example, I feel this is just a clear example, so I'll take this. There's a play. Now I'm of course blanking on the title, but it's Waiting for Godot, but it's been kind of set and updated to be and rewritten to be about two black teenagers in a city in the U.S. Who are trying to get out of very poor material circumstances. So they're on a street corner, okay, and that play is talking to this other play. There's a conversation going on there. So you can't understand this new play fully without understanding this other one. So those are two examples. It's the web that the play or the script that you're reading, it touches these other things. I hope that was clarifying. Thank you. Let's go here.
This is more of a specific question about your last play, and I was intrigued by the scene which Jenny and Peter did. And I asked somebody, I said, and for those that didn't see it, it was supposed to be between a man and a woman, and you staged it so that the man was behind a little dollhouse with a little puppet talking to the woman. And I just thought it was really clever, and I didn't know if it was supposed to be that way, and somebody said, no, in the play it's just written a man and a woman. What was your thought process in that?
Well, thank you for saying you liked it.
I thought it was great.
Yeah, so the script calls for the actor to be quite short, because you may remember there's the line that says something like, I lost a lot of hope. The woman's name in the play is Hope, and yeah. Anyway, there's this idea that when she left, he lost something. And the joke is that he's supposed to be quite short. But that wasn't what we had in actors, and I also thought that's sort of a realistic way of, or a realistic way of showing that, him being shorter, because the whole show is sort of this kind of wonky, somewhat mystical thing of people bringing in bags of love that they gave to each other, and you know, it's not really, it's not a realistic play. So I thought, well, is there some way that we can take this even a step further and, you know, make him an action figure? So I guess it was, you know, it's one thing and it's clear and fun to have it be, you know, a short actor or whatever, but it's another thing to see something that I felt like would jump out and catch people's attention and but still work. So it sounds like it did. Good.
Plus you could use that fabulous dollhouse.
Yes.
I mean, what an opportunity there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. I don't know how we're doing on time.
3:54.
Okay, so maybe one more, if anybody has one.
Question.
Yes, dear.
Maybe should I wait until dinner to ask this? What is the role of the playwright in like academic discussions about plays? Because you know I got my major in French and English, and so you know, when we were discussing literature, we would talk a lot about the author, but in English world, like in the literature world, you're trying to move away from talking about the author in reference to the work, because they kind of like to analyze the work by itself and not bring in the author of the book. Is that how it is with plays?
Yes and no. I think you're talking about something that sometimes is called the death of the author.
Yes.
Yeah, and it talks about, removing that contextual piece of information from considering the work. That's sort of, yes, some people adhere to that. And there are a lot of interesting kind of deep theoretical things around the theater that agree with that, and then there are ones that move past it, disagree with it, and there's a rich kind of thing there. So pick up a theater and theory book if you want to know any more about that. But just really quick before we end, a couple of, first a shameless plug. Come see our next show at Stage East. It's called Pool in the Water. It has a lot of kind of physical and device theater aspects. So you remember we talked about device theater. One thing I failed to mention, it also tends to be pretty physical because of some of the schools it comes out of. We don't need to get into that. It's the first 2 weekends of March, and it's a lot of fun, and it has a lot of adult language, so be warned. And here's just, I'll leave this up as you exit. This is just some suggested viewing and reading. Those first four are three, and they're all really great, especially the National Theater and the American Theater Wing. They go and they interview working professionals in the theater. Pretty fascinating stuff. Eleanor Fuchs. That's where we get some of our script reading ideas. And then these last four are kind of texts that will, the one that's least likely to bore you is at the top, the one that's most likely to bore you is at the bottom, and you can sort of decide for yourself. But thank you for coming and spending your afternoon